Gentlemen, we've got a situation here where when we came into this game last year, Michigan was the better team on paper. I don't think there was any question about that, even though the records were the same. If you looked at common opponents, who did what against Michigan State and Nebraska and Maryland and on down the line, Michigan fared much better against those teams. They dominated those teams much more so than Ohio State, which struggled in a lot of those games, namely Nebraska and Maryland, of course. But then when it came down to it, on the field, Ohio State's elite talent and the preparation by Urban Meyer and his staff were too much for Michigan once again. Now, here we've got a situation that's slightly different because Michigan was playing for all the marbles last year. Now they can be loose and fancy free and throw out the play, do whatever they want to because they've got really nothing to play for but to ruin Ohio State's season potentially. But we've got a Michigan team that seems to be coming of age and putting things together and playing much better football. How great should the concern be, Steve? And then, Kevin, you jump right on his back in regards to that Ohio State will lose this game to Michigan. I think Ohio State is clearly shown to be the best team out of these two and maybe the best team in the country, but Michigan certainly a top 10 to 12 team, but they've played much better in recent weeks.
Yeah, I think the concern is much greater today than it was a month ago. I think that you go back to that Wisconsin game, and I looked at it a little bit. Wisconsin rushed for over 300 yards against Michigan, and Michigan only had 40 yards rushing in that game. I go back to the preseason. I wrote this for our first look column today. Michigan was ranked 7th in the preseason polls. They were 5th, where Ohio State was 5th nationally. A lot of the magazines like Phil Steele and some of the other magazines made their annual trendy pick that this was going to be their year, that this was the year for Michigan to win the East. And what I don't think people took into account was the lack of a running back. You had Higdon, who left for the NFL. You had the other kid, Evans, who was suspended. So they didn't have a viable running back. It's taken them all year to kind of get that sussed out and figured out. Patterson, first half of the year, did not play like he was capable of playing. Donovan Peoples-Jones was injured. Bell came on kind of at mid-season. And then over on defense, people were thinking, oh, it's the Michigan defense. Don Brown's calling the signals. Just throw the winged helmets out there, and people are going to be held to 10 points a game. And here we go. Well, it doesn't work like that. You take Winovich, you take Bush, Rashawn Gary out of the mix. 3 guys who different people thought would have been All-American or all Big Ten guys, defensive player of the year caliber type guys. You take them out of the mix and it's going to be better. It wasn't. And so it's taken them a half a season to calibrate, develop, and bring some people along. He came out, Harbaugh, at halftime when they're down 21-7 at Penn State, and said that this will be our finest hour. And he was trying to, I don't know if he was trying to call his shot and say, hey, we're going to win this thing in the second half, but they doggone almost did. And from that moment on, they have played lights out. I mean, they blistered Notre Dame, who wanted no part of playing them the following week in the rain. And then here in the last few weeks, Maryland, there was another game in there, and then Indiana. This past week, Indiana had been playing pretty good football. It was a close game at halftime. And Patterson the last 2 weeks has thrown for over 300 yards. So he's starting to get it together. Peoples-Jones is healthy, it seems. And the defense is starting to come on and get stops and takeaways and make plays. So this was the Michigan that we had all been sold a bill of goods on back in August. They're finally come to the party here on November the 25th. It's just too late. They can't win a Big Ten championship this year. Their drought is now 15 full seasons to 2004, which is the longest Big Ten championship drought in Michigan football history and counting, 15 years. And so I don't know what else you can say other than they're going to be dangerous. This is their Super Bowl, because where are they going to go? They're going to go maybe to the Orange Bowl or Cotton Bowl or Rose Bowl to replace Ohio State or whoever, whatever happens. I mean, and they're going to play another team ranked anywhere from 8th to 13th or 14th, and probably a toss-up game, and who knows? This is their Super Bowl. This is it. So for those guys that have any kind of pride, and have had their nose rubbed in it, all these many years, it's time for them to stand up and be counted. And certainly Jim Harbaugh, I mean, 0 for against Ohio State, he's going to go through an entire 5-year cycle. And these are all his players. No wins over Ohio State. In fact, really, other than the double overtime game, none of the games have been particularly close. So I don't know. It is what it is. I guess we'll see on Saturday if Michigan is going to back up all this talk that, hey, we believe we can beat them. We're going to beat them, all this other stuff, and continue to play as they have here down the stretch. To me, that's the challenge for Michigan.
Hey, Kevin, before you take off on this, just want to remind everyone, if you leave comments and questions, we'll respond to anything that warrants a response. This guy in particular, Tony Girdman, he's commenting here in the live chat. Maybe he knows something. I don't know. He's commenting that Ohio State has game changers in Fields and Young. Who does Michigan have to counter? Of course, I'm speaking of Tony Girdman, left a comment in the live chat right there. But Kevin, your thoughts about Michigan's improvement over the last several weeks and whether they pose a real threat?
We can sit there and we can look at their passing game, and Shea Patterson's thrown for 384 against Michigan State and 366 against Indiana, but they've also run for 83 yards against Michigan State and 87 yards against Indiana. A one-dimensional team is not going to win this game. It's just not going to happen. It won't. So unless they can figure something else, unless Zach Charbonnet or one of their other guys is able to figure out how to run the ball, I'm not overly concerned at that point. That going up to Ann Arbor this series, I mean, I get it. I was an undergrad at Ohio State during 2-10-1 under John Cooper. I've seen crazy things happen. The better team not always winning the game and all those situations. But with that being said, I think that all of this talk of this renaissance resurgence of Michigan may be a little overblown. I mean, and I'm gonna piss off all the Notre Dame people. Notre Dame has been grossly overrated all year, every year. And, so they come in and they knock the snot out of Notre Dame 45-14, put up these huge numbers. And then, Michigan goes through and plays the same schedule that everybody's cranking on Ohio State for playing they ain't played nobody. When coming out of Notre Dame, they played Maryland, Michigan State, and Indiana, 3 teams that Ohio State has played. Yeah, they are finding their passing game. They need to, because they can't run the ball. Can't really protect the quarterback either. So, I think the defense is coming along pretty well. They've done a good job of holding, a hapless Michigan State team to 200 and something yards, low 200s. Indiana, they were a lot better with their other quarterback. Ohio State was able to avoid the one quarterback as well, too. They threw for 224. They ran for about 100 yards. They put up some points on them. But, I'm not ready to sit there and say, well, Michigan has turned it around, and Ohio State, by playing a little fast and loose with the ball against a top 10 team at Penn State, suddenly is, this paper champion, flawed on so many levels. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it whatsoever.
Are we going to possibly buy this, that there's concerns about Justin Fields' hand and just some of the nagging injuries he's been hit with in the last half of the season? The lower back on a few hits. He rolled the lower portion of his leg on the one tackle, and again the hand, and then J.K. Dobbins running the ball 36 times. Although I think back to last year's Maryland game in which he was given the ball like 38 times prior to Michigan, and that certainly didn't seem to hamper him against the Wolverines.
Yeah, I think that by and large, he's going to be okay. He's going to answer the bell. I think there was some concern as I rewatched that play that the defender who was on his back trying to go for the loose ball that he had fumbled, their ankles, their legs got tangled up, and his ankle basically got bent a way that it's not supposed to go. So I don't know if he was in a little bit of a shock there, or perhaps he also landed on top of the ball and was just a little bit winded. Sometimes that can happen too. But he was motionless there for about a minute, and it got deathly quiet there at Ohio Stadium. And we all lived through something like that, what would have been 5 years ago with J.T. Barrett this week, coming up 5 years ago on Friday, I'll have a story about the Michigan game that was played and how Barrett broke his ankle. It was toward the end of the third quarter of that game against Michigan, and they were able to press on and win the national championship without him. I don't think that Ohio State fans are particularly excited about the chance of going forward without Justin Fields. He for all of his many faults, which there aren't a lot of them, I say many, M-I-N-I, not many faults. I think the one that kind of came to the forefront last week was holding the ball in the pocket and staring too long. But if he does that instead of throwing a bad interception, I guess that's more acceptable. But he's got to either make a decision, step up and throw, or step up and go. And I think that's what Coach Day's probably teaching him this week, because I know at least one of the sacks seemed to me, people were blaming Thayer Munford right after the holding penalty. And it seemed to me like Fields was in the pocket for 4 seconds. He's got to make a decision. And the offensive line can't be expected to hold for much longer. And hold by that, I mean pass protect for much longer than 3 or 4 seconds. I think at that point he's on his own. So I think Day would like to see him trigger a little quicker with whatever it is he's going to do, because the challenges are only going to get tougher as you go forward. I mean, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, whoever it may be, Utah, Oklahoma, Clemson, Alabama, whoever it is, Clemson in that semifinal, and then LSU in the championship. If that's how it all turns out, there's going to be some people in there who are going to get in his face and create problems for him. As I go back to the beginning, again, this is what it looks like when you play talent that is close to even. And I think Michigan's got talent that is, if Ohio State's got 5s and 4s, Michigan's got a lot of maybe 1-5 and a lot of 4s and 3s. Right here, it's not as terribly pronounced a difference as people would think it might be, but Michigan's been number 2 to Ohio State's number 1 in all these recruiting class updates for all these years. So I'm interested to see again what kind of heart both teams are going to display. What does this really mean to you? We talked to KJ Hill about it, and he said, I go back to last winter, and he said, no, I go back to when I first stepped on campus, and we're doing sit-ups and push-ups in January and February with Michigan's name on them, because that's what this means. It is a year-round, 365-day-a-year commitment to be on this one day better than that other team. And that they live it, they breathe it, and they go the extra effort to put themselves in position to do better on this one day. So nothing that Michigan has tried in the last 2 decades has really had much sustained success against Ohio State. They beat the Buckeyes in 2003 when Ohio State was the defending national champions. They'd already lost the game to Wisconsin. And then obviously in 2011, when Ohio State was in complete disarray with Fickell as the coach that season, it was still a close game up there, but Ohio State had chances to pull it out. But again, as I say, I don't sense or see any kind of change in how Michigan approaches Ohio State. And until that happens, I don't see much of a difference in the final result.
Before we cut you guys loose on the next aspect of this matchup, I'll address the question on the screen from a Jinker GM. I love when people ask questions that they can go to Google for, but that's fine. I did it for them. The weather forecast in Ann Arbor on Saturday is calling for a rain-snow mix of 80% certainty, very slight winds at 10 miles per hour, but a high of 41, which, of course, the game time's at noon, so it should hit that 41 around third quarter, I would think. So it's a pretty typical last of November Ann Arbor day, gloomy and cold and dank and damp and rainy.
Dire
and just gloomy and
awful
and kind of overbearing, and it makes you want to just kind of, just kind of